Hello and welcome to the Business Buying Brit podcast episode 4. If you're looking to build wealth through buying and operating small businesses, this is the place for you. We'll be telling the stories of the men and women who have gone before you, how they've done it, hearing what has gone well, and importantly, what has not gone well. Ultimately, our goal is to learn from their wisdom so that your journey to buying that first business successfully can be accelerated. Today, we have Mr. Jordan Berry. Jordan previously worked in full-time ministry, then moved into buying laundromats, and is now probably the industry go-to in this space. Jordan, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, James, it's an honor to be on here with you. I appreciate you having me on and looking forward to talking the laundromats with you.
Awesome. So how we always start is just to rewind a little bit. I'd love to kind of hear a bit of backstory. I know you worked in Christian ministry kind of first before you became a full-time investor. So I'd love to hear about how that came about and then, what led you to kind of looking to do something else.
Yeah. So I started out, I was actually in college and I had a job working at a grocery store, and I got a quote unquote promotion where I was stocking liquor, but that was a night shift job. And so I was going to school full time during the day, stocking liquor during the night. And I would go like 2-3 days with very little sleep. And one day on the way home, or not on the way home, on the way to school from work, like 6 a.m, I was driving on the freeway and in the fast lane, and I woke up feet from the wall in the slow lane and didn't hit the wall, thankfully. But that was sort of, pun intended, a wake-up call for me that this maybe is not the best route to go. So I quit that job. And I was in a group online, and I was just sharing that I quit not online, on college, on campus. And I was just sharing that I, was looking for a new job. And after that meeting, one of the leaders of that group said, "Hey, I just talked with this pastor who's looking for a youth pastor. I think you'd be great at it. Maybe you should try it." So I applied for it and got the job. And 4 days after my 21st birthday, I became a youth pastor and was like, this is great. I love this. And so I was a physics major at the time. I was in my junior year of college, and I changed majors and I transferred schools and studied ministry and did that for like 15 years.
So very cool. So you finished your degree in ministry, and then you continued in that job, and you stayed in it for a decade and a half.
Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah. So not exactly the normal path on kind of anywhere along the path. It was all weird, and it just kind of got weirder. After about 14, 15 years, my wife and I had a couple kids, young kids, and it was just time in ministry can be very demanding of your time, but also just like emotionally demanding. And, you're wading into a lot of people's, deepest hurts a lot of times, and, a lot of great stuff too. But, it was just time to make a transition out of ministry, at least vocationally. And so, but when you have a degree in ministry and you've got 15 years of experience in ministry, you don't want to do ministry anymore. It's like, well, what do you do? And that was like a little bit of a crisis for me, like an identity crisis, I think. Just trying to figure out, okay, well, who am I if it's not tied to, doing ministry? And so I had this genius idea, and the idea was this. We have a house here in Southern California, and I said, why don't we rent out our house in Southern California? We'll take our 2 small kids and the savings we have in our bank account. Let's go buy a condo on the beach in Hawaii and go live over there doing whatever, selling jewelry on the beach or whatever. And then, when our kids are school age, if we want to, we can come back, net gain condo in Hawaii. And I thought that was a great idea. And my wife said we could do that, or we could buy a laundromat. So we bought a laundromat, and to this day, I don't own a condo in Hawaii.
So it was your wife's idea to buy a laundromat. It wasn't your idea.
Yeah. You know what? It was. And, that's probably surprising, but it'd be way more surprising if you knew my wife. It's very out of character for her to come up with something like that outside the box. But, The idea behind it was she had like basically a friend of her family's was working a 70 to 80 hour a week tech job in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he ended up buying a laundromat, replacing his income and working 5 to 10 hours instead a week that way. And so I thought, well, let's put our money into something like that where we could, not have to spend all our time working and we'd have income coming in, which I thought was a great idea.
Very
cool. Didn't work out that way for us initially, but
I know there's a but coming. a but coming. So actually the kind of driver for making the change or for going down this path was you knew of someone or your wife knew of someone that had these hours and they changed their life through buying a business. So you thought, collectively, you and your wife, why not us? We could do that too. Because I like that mindset. And it's often through observing something that you didn't previously think about or know was possible that kind of changes your mindset. And you're like, hold on a minute, like there's something here. I need to go deeper into it. And it wasn't a specific laundromat then that you'd seen. It was just the concept or the idea.
Yeah. And I think you're dead on that, and I think that that's happening right now all over the place, right? In small businesses in general. I think there's like almost like a great awakening happen. We were kind of talking offline before, where there's a lot of people who are starting to get interested in buying businesses. And I think partly that's because there's more exposure towards the benefits of owning these small businesses and the kinds of freedom that you can gain from owning a small business. So, but it was the concept, and that concept was pretty unfamiliar to us up until this point. And we didn't know anything about business. We didn't know anything about real estate investing. Nothing, and that will demonstrate itself in the rest of the story going forward. But yeah, that was the concept is what hooked us.
Okay, so you knew you wanted to do it or you wanted to give it a go. So then walk me through how you actually sourced that first deal that you ended up closing on.
Yeah, so had a conversation with the family friend, and he had nothing but great things to say, which was great. But number one, he was relatively new in the industry, and then number two, he bought a good deal and everything went real smooth for him. So he didn't really learn a whole lot to pass on to us. So we had to go learn that stuff ourselves, our own way. So this was like a decade ago or so, almost a decade ago. And there really wasn't very much information online about how to value them, how to buy them, due diligence on this stuff, even how to run them. Not like there really just wasn't that much information. So we took to Google or maybe even Yahoo at the time, I don't know, and searched for, laundromats for sale near me, and found a deal that we thought was interesting. Contacted the broker, and the broker said, yeah, I'll show it to you. So he showed us that deal, but there were some complications with that, and that didn't work. And he said, I have this other deal that might work better for you. And so he's the one who showed us this deal that we ended up buying. And
this one is located in Southern California.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
In right on the border of East LA.
Okay. Nice. So it may have changed since this first deal, but how are laundromats typically valued? Because we talk a lot about business valuations, and they're typically not, laundromats or car washes, because sometimes these are kind of slightly separate. Are they valued on a cap rate basis, like a piece of commercial real estate, or are they typically valued on a multiple of earnings, like a more traditional small business?
Yeah, they're valued on a multiple. The thing about it is that they're really the same, right? But the multiple is just the inverse of a cap rate, essentially. And so, you take the net income and you're applying a multiple to it. And typical multiple at the time was somewhere between 3.5 and 5. Now what we're seeing, as there's more people being interested, inventory is a little low, we're seeing those multiples creep up a little. So maybe more now, 4 to 5.5 times multiple for these laundromats.
4.5. Okay. And that's what you're currently seeing them go for. Is that what you purchased at the time?
4 to 5.5. So, well, that's, we didn't go through the traditional valuation process when we purchased. Essentially we relied, huge mistake, right? But we relied almost entirely on this broker who, essentially didn't have our best interest in mind. And in a nutshell, what he told us was this business really isn't making all that much money. It's what we call a zombie mat in the industry, right? It's a fixer upper. And, you're going to put new machines in. So we really don't need to do any evaluation. We really don't need to, do any due diligence. Essentially, it's breaking even, more or less is what he told us. So we just kind of plucked a number out of thin air and bought it for that.
Okay, so there was no diligence process. There was no professionals, and there's no shame in this. What I've actually found through interviewing people, and I kind of relate to this as well. Often the guys or the people that have been the most successful in the investing often have a first deal that didn't go so well, and it ended up turning for good. It's like, why did this not go so well, and how do I fix it and make sure I'm really buttoned up for future deals? So, I appreciate you being vulnerable and open and honest, but there's also no shame for those listening. Like, we all make mistakes, even people who you see, huge people on social medias, or Jordan is the go-to guy in this space. Like, everyone along their journey has made mistakes. So I'm very grateful that Jordan is sharing this today. But okay, so no diligence really, no valuation really done. How long did it take you to close then? Once the broker said, like, this is the price?
I want to say maybe 30 days.
Okay.
Max. I mean, we ended up buying that one all cash. And then we financed the equipment purchase after. So we bought almost entirely new equipment. One of the great things about laundromats is there's some great financing options. Right now is a little tough because all financing is a little tough right now. But there's like 100% financing options and stuff like that. So we ended up buying it cash. I think we bought it for 60 or 65,000. And then we put in at the time, probably a little less than $150,000 of equipment in it.
Okay. And you financed that. So basically the business wasn't really making any profit already. And then you added all of this additional capital expenditure, which you had debt payments on. So it made the cash flow worse.
Right. Well, yes. So, and he had told us that it was making a little bit of money, maybe breaking even. It was losing a couple grand, $2-3 grand a month before we added the debt, on top of it. And so, and business did improve. He basically said, we put new equipment in, Field of Dreams is happening. If you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And that happened to an extent, but not nearly to the extent that it needed to happen. So we lost a couple grand a month at least, for nearly 2 years while I was trying to figure out what happened.
Yeah. And so, like, you've been very transparent saying, you bought it wrong. But I've also found that if you buy it right, it's also to be expected that often the results can be expected to come down 5-10% in that first year anyway, because the business, maybe if it's a business with more people, that they have to adjust to you have to adjust to them, the customers, suppliers, things like that. So even if you bought it well, I think often new business owners go in thinking, I'm going to 3x this business. Well, actually, you need to be prepared to just do a year, which is basically, if you can do the same as you did last year, I consider that a win personally.
It's a win. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, in no sense of the terms was my experience a win on that first one, at least initially there. How
did you feel for that first year? Because like business stress is a very real thing. And I think a lot of people, I'm a huge supporter of this whole space. Like, I've left my career to buy businesses myself, and I love it. I wake up on a Monday morning, like, ready to go. But the stress of owning a business is different to that of a W-2 for sure. So you've just told us, about that first year where you were losing a couple grand every month. Like, how did you deal with that? And how did your wife deal with it? Because what's come out of it is it's a beautiful story. It's, huge success. It's a very successful podcast. It's all of these things, but you could easily have quit in that first year. So like, talk me through that and your mindset and how you dealt with it.
Listen, if I had to pick one word to describe at least sort of the early phases of that, it would be despair, man. It was rough. And, you know, here's one of the things that really messed with me. Just, you know, if we're laying it out on the line right now, you know, one of the things that messed with my head was there's a stat that floats around out there. To this day, I'm not sure where the stat comes from or exactly how accurate it is. There's a stat that says 95% of all laundromats are successful. And so I was left standing there like looking around like, how am I in the 5% that can't figure this easy business out? Right. Like I can't figure it out. What is going on here? And, you know, it was hard, man. And, what was interesting though, it was sort of observing, well, looking back on it now, observing my response to it versus my wife's response to it. And you asked about her response too. My response to it was like, I got to figure it out. Like it doesn't matter. Like I have to go Christmas Eve. I have to go, you know, before my kid's birthday party. Like I have to figure out how to make this thing work. It's like, has to work. Right. And my wife's response to it was very much, she like, eventually I had to just listen, we're not going to talk about it at all. It was too much, right? It was too much because we went into it thinking, hey, we're going to be bringing in income and not working all the time. And it was the exact opposite. I was like spending a whole lot of time trying to figure this business out and we were losing money. Right. And so it was a stressful time. And, you know, most people know this, right? Financial pressure, financial stress, that puts strain on all your relationships also. Right. So even for us, you know, it was difficult because my life was consumed with trying to turn this business around and she couldn't hear anything about the business because it was just too overwhelming. And so we got to, you know, a point there for a little bit where we weren't even communicating very much because we just didn't know how. Right. So it was tough, man. And it's in large part, it's why I started Laundromat Resource and why I started sharing the lessons that I learned. I was like, nobody should ever have to learn the lessons I learned the way that I learned them. Right. Because it was tough, man. And it was dark, for a little bit, but, like you said, you know, it's always darkest before the dawn. Beautiful things come out of this stuff. And actually, I won't say I wouldn't change anything going back, but I'm kind of grateful in one sense of how things did play out because, you know, if they didn't play out that way, I'd probably own a couple laundromats and just be sort of chugging along instead of now I'm trying to help people achieve financial freedom through laundromats. And even bigger than that, the mission really is to transform communities. Right? Because laundromats are they're a central business in a lot of, especially lower end communities. And it's one of the few places people still gather. So by helping people build successful laundromats, it actually is doing something very beautiful for communities too. So, you know, it was dark, but you know, something beautiful did come out of it.
I really like where this interview is going because and I really appreciate your vulnerability. I think this will, you know, really help some people listening. Just because of how transparent you're being. What advice would you have to someone listening to this right now who's maybe an owner of something and it's not quite going as planned? Like the spreadsheet isn't quite lining up to the reality.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one, listen, and I used to tell people this a lot when I was a pastor and doing like pastoral counseling or something like that is like, we're not meant to live life alone and go through struggles alone. Right. So, you know, one of the things that I didn't mention, but that was my wife and I both were feeling was there was an underlying sense of embarrassment, right? About failing at a easy business, especially. Right. And so it made it difficult. Number one, I didn't really know where to turn, you know, to talk to somebody. But number two, there was that sort of pride that kind of kept me from being able to be vulnerable like I'm being right now with somebody while I'm in the midst of it. Now, it's more difficult to do that when you're going through it and you're still in the middle of it. It's easier to do it now from the other side. But I think I would have saved myself a whole lot of heartache. Like if I could have talked to myself for 15 minutes, myself now, 15 minutes, like it would have just saved me probably years of of heartache and pain, right? So talk to somebody. If you're going through it right now, talk to somebody specifically who has already been there. It doesn't even necessarily have to be in your industry. Find another business owner. Go to a Facebook group and ask specific questions. People are willing to help. Like, go wherever you can go, Chamber of Commerce, like whatever, go find some other business owners and talk to them. Because sometimes all it takes is an outside perspective and one idea that sparks like a whole new trajectory for your business. And a lot of times when we're in the middle of it, we're not capable of seeing those things on our own.
That's good. I've been thinking a lot about, in the Bible, it talks about God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. And often like there has to be this like breaking down of like getting rid of pride. Because actually once you get rid of your pride and get rid of your ego, that's often this is my observation, it's often when God uses you the most. But sometimes you need to go through some of these hard times to be taught these valuable lessons that we wouldn't have learned any other way.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wearing my Live Humble.
There we go. Perfect.
Right now. So great bring in on there. And humility actually, that gets put down a lot that's kind of looked down on in our culture a lot of times. But I almost kind of see it as a superpower now. It's not my natural state. I've got that same like pride. And I think any business owner, you're going to have some degree of pride in your ability to solve problems, to get things done, because that's what we do as entrepreneurs, as business owners. We solve problems and we get things done. But there are points where you can just shortcut a lot of things if you can just be a little bit humble and talk to some other people and just kind of swallow that embarrassment, swallow that pride, and solve a problem even quicker, which is really, the results are really what we're looking for anyway. So
I love all that. Okay. So practically then, how did you actually end up fixing that cash bleed?
Not that way. Not the easy way. It took a few years. So, one thing that I learned about laundromat was it was a lot easier to rehab the laundromat than it was to rehab the reputation of the laundromat. And I dropped, almost 150 grand on rehabbing the laundromat, or more than that, actually, with all the build outs and everything, on rehabbing that laundromat. And I spent $0 on rehabbing the reputation of the laundromat. And so, part of it was just time for people to say, oh, this is not, there's not homeless people doing drugs at this laundromat anymore, right? Like, word just kind of had to get out, and it took just a long time for that to happen. It just doesn't happen just naturally, right? And so it was mostly time. I tried a couple little advertising things, but they were sort of half-hearted efforts, and I didn't really, honestly, man, I was scared because I was expecting to make money. I had all this money going out every month, not coming in. And I didn't know if marketing was going to help me or not. And so I sort of turtled up a little bit and was like, I'm not going to spend more money on advertising to try to get business in, because I don't want to spend more money. Like, that's more money going out, and I don't know if it's coming back. Right. And so it was tough. And that's where, if I would have talked to somebody who knew what they were doing, they could have said, here's how much money you're going to put in. Here's what your advertising platforms need to be, and here's what you need to say in the advertising. And then I could have done that and just shortcutted all of this, pain that I was going through. Right. So that's one example of that. But instead I took the long, slow, just be consistent, and provide a good experience, and word will get out. I didn't even ask for Google reviews or anything, or Yelp reviews, anything like that. Right. Simple things like that would have just shortcutted that process a whole lot. I didn't do any of that stuff. It was just time, consistency.
You raised a good point on the marketing, because my background, when I was in my W-2, I was in turnaround and restructuring. And what I saw when businesses are not doing so well, often the first thing that management cut is marketing, because they're discretionary, it can go. And then marketing goes, that means your sales lower, which means there's less money for marketing, which means there's less sales, and it becomes this horrible downward spiral. And so often the conviction and the boldness to say, I'm going to keep going with marketing. Yeah, I'm going to track the dollars to make sure I'm being efficient. But like, it takes such courage to, if things are not going so well, to say, I'm still going to market.
Yeah. And you know, it's that's so true. And you know, that whole like cutting the marketing budget, I mean, it feels right, right? Like you're trying to figure out where you can shave things off. It's the exact wrong thing to do, right? And there's a you know, sort of the narrative in laundromats has been until recently, where I've been really trying to make a push to change this, but it has been, you don't market in laundromats. You don't have to market. You don't need to. And so that was another thing that sort of held me back. Is like, well, I'm not supposed to be marketing. Nobody markets laundromats, right? And so, you know, again, just kind of the exact wrong thing to do there, but I didn't know. So,
well, we just learn through experience, right? And then sometimes you just need to be bold and take that next step. And we all learn so much just by doing. You don't want to be stuck in your basement, you know, with analysis paralysis and not actually taking risks. So look, I think this is awesome. Okay. So we talked about that laundromat. How have things evolved for you since then? How has your kind of collection of assets and investments grown? And what is your vision now for the future?
Yeah, so things are interesting right now. So I bought another laundromat before that one started making money. I was like, well, I'll just buy another one, and then that one will make enough money to cover this one and give me money. That one also had its rough patches too, and didn't go exactly as expected. I thought I had learned all the lessons. There were more lessons, it turns out, to learn. But you know, so bought another one, bought that with a commercial property, which was great. And then kind of slowed down a little bit and was trying to figure out, okay, what's the play next, right? And it was at that point I started sort of getting a little more contact with other laundromat owners, and so I started hearing similar types of stories, not the same as mine, but similar types of stories as mine, where people were just kind of getting fleeced by brokers because there really wasn't anywhere to get information. So I started a little blog there on laundromatresource.com just to share what I had learned with people. And then that turned into a YouTube channel. And then I was like, well, I really want to help people and myself in this business. Maybe I should talk to the best people in the business who are doing it really well. Right. And so that turned into my podcast, Laundromat Resource Podcast. And I interview laundromat owners and other industry professionals. So that kind of started taking off, and that has, a community now, which is really awesome. And, everybody's helping each other, and that's really the goal, right? The goal is not to be the answer guy or the guru or anything like that. The goal is to facilitate or like have a platform where we can all sort of help each other out. There's plenty of things I don't know still in this business. So that's been great. And sort of as a result of that, sort of unanticipated result of the podcast and the YouTube and the website, the blog, all that stuff, has been a kind of just a growing interest in this business, particularly with people who don't necessarily want to run a laundromat. And so what's kind of happening now, what's sort of evolving now is I have a little fund, that the goal is to build a large laundromat portfolio through this fund. And so in order to sort of set that up, I've sold that first laundromat just recently. It was a smaller laundromat. Even though it was profitable, it was making just a few $1,000s a month, which is great. But I think the goals and the aspirations have grown now on what that looks like. And so now it's a restructuring of my personal portfolio of laundromats and hopefully a growth of the portfolio through that fund. So that's sort of the goal.
That's a very exciting future you got mapped out. And so then you also have this community centered around. So is your podcast like the center of the community, or is it kind of alongside? How is that structured?
Yeah. Well, so everything kind of feeds into each other, right? I'd say the podcast, the YouTube channel, and the website are all sort of the primary drivers of the community. And then, I mean, we have a community platform, on the website. There's a sort of a freemium thing. There's the free community where you get tons of resources for free and, all the engagement and all that stuff. And then there's, a pro community that's a paid community where you get access to a little bit more. And we do some, group calls and stuff like that too. So yeah, I'd say those media platforms all sort of feed into each other and into that community.
Okay, nice. Okay, so I'm just tying this all together. So looking back, you've had some definitely some hard times. You've come through and you've built this, very large kind of successful podcast platform that is really well known in the industry. I'm assuming you look back and are grateful you took those first steps and you took these risks despite the hard times. I'm assuming that would be your advice, but I want to leave the floor open to you. Like, what would your advice be to someone who's like almost too scared to make that first jump,
Yeah. So I do a lot of consulting too in the industry, and one of the things I hear over and over and over again, I know this is like a lot of people, not just in our industry, but entrepreneurship and real estate investing, all of this, right? You hear this all the time, which is, I've been thinking about doing this for years, and the question becomes, well, why haven't you, but going through what I went through and like feeling the feelings that I felt, like that's like pretty close to worst case scenario for a lot of people. And so I don't blame people who are afraid to take that first step. But I will say that what's interesting about how everything played out, and again, I mean, we made every mistake in the book. We lost money. We lost money initially on that second one too. And so I was the world's worst laundromat owner, right? Pretty much worst case scenario. And what's interesting kind of looking back on it now is, yes, it was difficult, but number one, it fundamentally changed me in very positive ways, I would say. Things that used to feel like a really big deal are nothing now. Like I don't lose any sleep over, stuff. Like, for example, if I accidentally pay a bill late or something, that would have been like, I'm like, goody two shoes, people pleaser guy. That would have crushed me, a decade ago. Now I'm like, well, there's a 2% fee for being late on that bill. I'm like, okay, like no big deal. Right. But and that's a small kind of silly example, but I mean, I think it fundamentally changed me in a lot of ways like that, but also my perspective on life and what it can be is much bigger now. My view on myself and what I can accomplish in myself and my wife and what we can accomplish together. Like I have no doubts that whatever we try to tackle, eventually we'll make it work. It may not be the right way the first time, but we'll make it work. Because I look back, even through the darkest times, like stuff was good, right? It was hard, but stuff was good. We had, we were with the family. We had a great family, still have a great family, right? Like great family, great friends. We really didn't miss out on a whole lot of life, there. And so not only have we come out better, but also, life was still okay, even when it was hard. It was hard, yes, but it was still okay. And it was pretty much worst case scenario there. So all I would say is if you're in that place where you're afraid to take that first step, number one, that's okay. Like feel okay about that. But number two, just take it anyways. Like just step off the cliff, right? Like just take it anyways and see where life takes you. And yeah, it's scary. You don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know how it's going to go, and do it smart, involve people as early as possible who already have done what you're trying to do and get their input and get their advice, all that stuff. But just take the step because it will change you and it will grow you in ways that you could never even imagine right now. And, man, the possibility for life to just really open up for you is huge, right? So, again, it's common, so don't feel bad if you're afraid to take that first step, but just do it anyways.
I think that's awesome. That's kind of like the mic drop ending, I think. I have nothing more to add to that. So, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. Where can people find out more about you?
So Laundromat Resource, laundromatresource.com, Laundromat Resource Podcast, Laundromat Resource on YouTube, all the social media platforms and everything. So go check it out over there if you're interested in checking out laundromats.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, James.